Merriam-Webster's definition of hate is intense hostility, dislike, or aversion, usually deriving from fear. But what is it that you truly fear? Do you see my melanin as a weapon? My black skin, this beautiful obsidian? Do not be afraid of the dark. The only thing that lurks is my greatness. So what is it that you truly fear? Is it my resilience? The fact that I snap back, my hat to the back, my flight despite the odds that are stacked, and the target on my back? Is it my black power, my refusal to cower, to be a prisoner in a nation my ancestors built? Nah. Maybe it is my strength, the dominance of the talented 10th, or my mental agility that rivals my physical ability. Perhaps it is my perpetual hope. Hope for a better life, a better way, a better plan, a better day. Is it my faith? No, not a religion, not a denomination. My devotion to the talented 10th? Is it that you see the true God in me? Is it my brilliance that offends, my black boy joy, self-sustained, unbothered, and free? Do you want to be me? Is it the global influence you envy? The undeniable impact on history? Yes, we are the creators, master innovators, game changers. We are the culture. And we too sing America. So do not see my melanin as a weapon, my black skin, this beautiful obsidian. Do not be afraid of the dark. You need us.
All righty, welcome to the 2025 Honors Speech and Debate Society's Debate Showcase. Of course, hosted by none other than our illustrious honors program here on the Hill. I'm Mrs. Holloway, Carla Draper Holloway, and I serve as the Assistant Director for the program and Program Instructor. And tonight, we will engage in monologues about the Black experience, as the one you just heard by Mr. Gerald Collins. Can we give him a hand? Gerald did an original piece that I wrote a few weeks ago. And when I wrote it, I had him in mind that could deliver how I felt that day after watching the news. And so I hope that that piece speaks to me for all of us. He did a great job. Gerald Collins is a freshman scholar from my hometown, the Magic City, Birmingham, Alabama. And so I'm so happy that he was able to provide the passion for that beautiful performance. So why debate? Debate is a skill, it's an art. It's an art to it. I love debate because it teaches critical thinking skills. It teaches people how to problem solve, how to objectively look at an issue or a problem from both sides. Very often, when we think about issues, we tend to automatically assume a position without fully researching both sides of the debate. As the founder and coach for the Honors Speech and Debate Society, that's one of the things that we do in practice. We learn how to research both sides of a debate in an objective format. And so tonight will be our first showcase, first of many this year, for our debaters. I want to give a shout out to our Honors Speech and Debate Society members. Raise your hand. So some of these people that you'll hear from tonight, but all of them aren't competing tonight, but they will be competing in other competitions and events that we have. So tonight's resolution, each debate begins with a resolution. The resolution is, should the U.S. government regulate social media platforms even if it restricts free speech? Now, there's ample evidence for both sides of that debate. The judges will be asked tonight to choose a winner for this debate as debaters present 3 rounds. There will be an opening round, a rebuttal round, and a closing round. There are 2 teams. There is the affirmative team that will be arguing that yes, social media platforms should be regulated even if it restricts free speech. And the negative stance, the negative team, will argue that no, social media platforms should not be regulated because in protection of free speech. And so we are in for a treat on this here night as we have some great debaters tonight. So I want them to go ahead and transition. I present to you the affirmative team captained by our debate captain, Miracle, and her other team members, Kelvin Edwards, Monica Williams, and Olivia Morris. They will take their positions here on the dais. The negative team is captained by Chance Williams. Will you come forward with your team? Shyla Wade, Jara Walden, and Nancy M. Bobson will take their place here on the dais. Before we get started, I have to introduce our debate judges tonight, our judges. So I will begin here with a person that most of you all already know if you are in freshman English, honors freshman English, with Dr. Blackman. He is serving this year again as our debate judges. He's an associate faculty member in the Department of English. Mr. Aaron Dixon, I'm so thankful for him being here, who is the Executive Director for Freshman Academy. Dr. Charlotte Teague, the chairperson here from our English and Foreign Languages Department as well. And our very experienced student debate judge, our senior scholar, Ms. Leah Nelson, will also be serving as a judge. I want you all to listen closely because at the end of the 3 rounds on each side, you will receive a QR code. Well, you will weigh in and put in your own vote and see who the people's choice winner will be, okay? All righty, so now that we've introduced our judges, I've talked about the resolution, talked a bit about debate, we will begin. We'll begin with the affirmative side that will present the opening remark, followed by the negative side, the negative stance that will present their opening, and then we will have a 2.5-minute break as they gather their research in preparation for the second and third rounds. At the end of the full debate, we will be graced by Ms. Chanel White, who will present our closing monologue, another piece of the Black experience, before hearing about who the winner will be, the judges' winner, as well as the People's Choice winner that you all will vote on, okay? So we will begin with the affirmative team. Give them a hand as she comes.
What were you doing at 14
We all had our dreams of what we could be. Doctor, lawyer, president. But no one ever thinks that at 14 years old, they would become a statistic. But that is exactly what happened with Molly Russell. On the morning of November 21st, 2017, Ian Russell opened his daughter's bedroom door, expecting to wake her up for the day. Instead, he found her lifeless. Molly Russell was 14 years old when she took her own life after being exposed to a flood of harmful content online. Algorithms trapped her in a cycle of false information, feeding her post after post that romanticized self-harm. Instead of guiding her towards help, platforms like Instagram and Pinterest pushed her deeper into isolation. They didn't just allow this content, they recommended it. Every day, people are manipulated by falsehoods that thrive online. Social media has become a breeding ground for false information, hate speech, and dangerous narratives. But free speech does not mean freedom from accountability. And the consequences aren't just confusion or division, they're life and death. So should the US government regulate social media platforms to control false information? Our answer is yes. False information doesn't just mislead, it destroys lives. During the pandemic, we looked to leaders for guidance. Republican leaders dismissed the vaccine, and many of their supporters followed. Democratic leaders encouraged vaccination, and their voters listened. A study in JAMA Internal Medicine found that after vaccines became available, the excess death rate among Republican voters was 43% higher than among those of Democratic voters. Not because the virus chose sides, no, because false information did. Then came January 6, 2021. The insurrection wasn't spontaneous, it was built on months of election falsehoods, baseless claims of fraud, and the belief that democracy itself had failed. The rioters who stormed the Capitol believed they were fighting for justice. In reality, they were fighting for a lie. Now ask yourself, how many lives are we willing to lose for a lie? If content can kill, if false information can spread faster than a virus, if unchecked lies can push a nation to the brink of collapse, then social media cannot remain unregulated. A democracy pushed to its breaking point. At what cost? The US government must act. Social media platforms must be held accountable. So should the US government regulate social media platforms to combat false information? Again, our answer is yes. Our opponents will argue that this threatens free speech, but free speech was never meant to protect those who weaponize lies. First, false information online can push vulnerable people towards tragic decisions. Second, false information endangers public health, spreading doubt and fear that put millions at risk. Third, false information threatens democracy itself, fueling division, unrest, and even violence. If speech can incite violence, topple democracies, and cost lives, then at what point do we recognize that regulation isn't about suppression, it's about protecting the truth. It's about ensuring free speech doesn't become a tool to destroy the very democracy it was meant to serve. So now I ask you all, when do we say enough? How many more lives must be lost? How much more suffering must we endure before we acknowledge that free speech does not mean freedom from consequences? Molly Russell is gone because of false information. Millions are dead because of false information about COVID. Our Capitol was attacked because of false information. So the United States must regulate social media, because if we don't, the next disaster is not a matter of if, It is a matter of when. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges and fellow debaters, today we strongly oppose the resolution that suggests the U.S. government should regulate social media platforms to combat false information, even if it restricts free speech. Our position is simple. We believe the government regulation of social media content poses a grave threat to our fundamental rights, invites dangerous overreach, and ultimately fails to address the core issue of misinformation. First and foremost, let's consider the First Amendment. The U.S. Constitution guarantees the right to free speech, and this right must not be compromised. The amendment states, and I quote, that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. The moment that we allow the government to decide what information is true or false, we risk empowering the government to dictate narratives that dominate our public discourse. If the government is given control over misinformation policies, we must ask, who will hold them accountable when they themselves are spreading the falsehoods? History has proven that governments abuse their power when given the authority to regulate speech. We cannot allow the government to be the arbiter of truth. This sets a dangerous precedent for the suppression of dissenting opinions and undermines the foundations of this here very democracy. If the same officials responsible for spreading false information are also given the power to regulate speech, can we still call this a democracy? True democracy thrives on the free exchange of ideas, not government-controlled narratives. Our first president once stated, if the freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. Here, Washington is warning us all that the dangers of restricting free speech leads to the loss of personal autonomy and political freedom. Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost. To understand the risk, we need not only to look at historical abuse of power. Governments have often used their control over information to silence marginalized communities, civil rights activists, and political opponents. In the past, movements like the Civil Rights Movement were once labeled as subversive, and today, misinformation laws have weaponized in places like Russia and Turkey to silence dissent. Government's overreach through surveillance and media manipulation restricted the ability of civil rights leaders to freely express their views and weaken their effectiveness in advocating for social change, for people like me, for people like you. Key figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were harassed by the FBI as he attempted to undermine King's credibility by spreading false information. The IPI media covers in present time Russia's fake news laws that have been used to silence journalists reporting on the war in Ukraine, or Turkey's disinformation laws imprison political opponents. If the U.S. follows this path, we risk moving toward a system where truth is dictated by those in office and not discovered by us, the people. The legislation criminalizes the dissemination of information, and that contradicts the government's narratives, thereby undermining press freedom and restricting public access to truthful information. When the government gains the power to regulate speech, it can use that power to target opposition and silence dissent, which harms the democratic processes and public rights. So let me ask you all a question. Do we really want to give this power to our government? Better yet, let me ask it today. Do we really want to give this power to our current government? History has shown that the governments often get the truth wrong themselves. The COVID-19 pandemic, like my opponent stated, for example, we saw that the U.S. government were sending conflicting messages on the mask mandates and the vaccine safety. That same source that was telling you to get the vaccine was the same source that was telling you if you got it, you'd end up sick. So do you want to trust them? If the government cannot even get its own messages correct, how can we trust them to regulate what messages are true or false on our social media? In addition to maintaining our constitutional rights and understanding our freedom, we must stay educated. Disinformation and free speech are not the same. While disinformation is harmful, the solution should not be through government intervention, but through better media literacy, fact-checking, and individual responsibility. The freedom to express opinions, ideas, and even misinformation is crucial for the exchange of ideas that suppose meaningful discussion in our democracy. So let me ask you, if the government can regulate misinformation today, what stops them from silencing political dissent tomorrow? So I'm gonna leave you with one thing. The fight against false information should not come at the expense of of our fundamental rights. Thank you.
Can I have everyone in here close their eyes? Imagine a world where lies and false information are as influential as the truth. Unfortunately, this is not a distant nightmare, but our current reality, driven by unchecked false information on social media. As we champion free speech, we must also champion the truth. Are we really trying to protect free speech or false information? My opponent mentions that the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, and government regulations do not follow this amendment right. However, according to the Free Speech Center, the First Amendment is designed to further the pursuit of truth, which is why it does not engage in slander, defamation, or publishing false information knowingly with a reckless disregard for truth. This isn't censorship, it's accountability. Our opponents ask, who defines false information? Who decides what is what? False information, any statement or representation fact that is not true, which is made intentionally. This comes from Law Insider. However, if you look at the Webster Dictionary or a simple Google search, you will get a similar definition. The government is not saying what they think it means, it's the actual definition. There should be no ifs, ands, or buts. In the current state of the government, what about the current state of your social media? We elected these government officials. Are we saying that we can't change the same government that we want to change already? We all saw what happened. We want change. Why are you trying to not let us change? We want change for you. But at what cost? At the cost of truth? Public trust? The foundation of informed decision making? The spread of false information not only misleads, but also erodes and destroys the foundation of a functioning society. Regulation can be a scary thing in living in a nation where things are controlled, but we already regulate things that keeps people safe. Food, drugs, transportation, even how high a fire escape has to be. And yet, we treat social media like it's untouchable. Lies don't kill. Tell that to the families that mourn loved ones lost to COVID. Tell that one to the ones who fought on January 6th. Tell that to Molly Russell's parents. But let's be clear, social media is already regulated. Every single solitary app, website, or platform has community guidelines. We are not calling for new restrictions. We are just trying to improve what is already in place in 3 things. Number 1, physical harm and violence, harmful health, and voter census falsehood already gets taken down by a majority of community guidelines. We will continue that, and anything that does not fall under these categories but includes false information will have a disclaimer. And number 2, a law will be enacted to all apps, no matter their size or scope. If an app does not meet the required standards as stated before, it may be temporarily paused to allow for necessary improvements. The Supreme Court ruled on whether federal security and health officials were wrong to contact major social media platforms to point out mis- and disinformation that was clearly dangerous, like posts about national security and child sexual abuse. Stuff that called for violence. That's not censorship, it's protecting the public. However, our opponents prioritize their own interests without fully considering the broader impact on others. This debate isn't about a blind trust in the government. It's about whether or not we let lies run rampant when we already have the tools to stop them. It is truly dangerous. Since over 100 years ago, Mark Twain said, "A lie can travel halfway across the world before the truth can even put its shoes on." Thank you.
What does freedom mean to you? I mean, we are currently on a campus founded by a former slave, so I assume freedom must resonate with you somehow. My opponent will have you believe that government regulation of social media is a necessary step to combat false information. However, what they refuse to acknowledge is the dangerous precedent this sets for censorship, government overreach, and it doesn't solve the root problem. So allow me to break down their arguments and expose the flaws in their reasoning. My opponent will tell you that social media false information disproportionately harms Black voters. But the real threat to democracy is allowing the government to decide what information is permissible. The FBI's Coin Intel program, for instance, labeled civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King and the Black Panther Party as threats based on selective disinformation claims. And that information comes from the FBI themselves. And according to PolitiFact, a nonpartisan fact-checking organization, approximately 56% of statements made by current politicians in 2024 were rated as false, mostly false, or completely false. And so I ask the affirmative, will the government fact-check the government? And if so, what's truly going to determine what's fact or not? My opponent conveniently ignores the disturbing consequences of such policies in authoritarian regimes. My colleague mentioned in the opening that Turkey and Russia also regulate social media. Russia has implemented laws obscenely aimed at curbing fake news. And these various fake news legislations, according to research done by Harvard, have been employed to suppress accurate reporting on sensitive issues such as the invasion of Ukraine and the status of foreign nations. This is leading to an exodus of journalists and the closure of independent media outlets. Their legislation criminalizes the dissemination of information that contradicts their government's narratives, thereby undermining press freedom and restricting public access to truthful information. And so I ask you, will we trust the US government, the same government that would have you believe Jim Crow laws weren't that bad? A previous administration used $267 million of your money to simply study and attempt to combat false information. And that information comes from the Department of Health and Human Services. This was specifically an attempt to try to combat misinformation around COVID-19. And I'm sure we're all aware of how spectacularly that failed. The previous White House press secretary said the administration was identifying problematic posts for Facebook to censor because they contained misinformation. So instead of pressuring independent companies to follow regulation by creating blanket overbearing laws, like my opponents suggest, how about we incentivize companies to take matters into their own hands, like Twitter's community notes? And speaking of the previous administration's office, we have seen how things are now. The affirmative would have you place blind faith in the government to tell you what is fact. And so I ask you, the people, do you trust the US government? The same government founded by slave owners and rapists. The same government that was founded on stolen land. The same government currently run by people who spread misinformation and are conveniently in place to determine what is true and false. My opponent will try to convince you that the American people want the government to regulate social media. But according to a study done at Boston University and verified by Harvard, 46% of Americans strongly disagree with that the US government should regulate social media. And that's compared to only the 28% of Americans who strongly say they should. The people believe that the government should not regulate social media. My opponent will try to convince you that this is about saving lives. Molly Russell wasn't even a US citizen. She was a citizen of the UK, and that's according to her own foundation. And her death cannot be solely attributed to the social media algorithms. Studies like those published in the Lancet Psychiatric demonstrates that social media can help individuals at risk of suicide find support networks and mental health intervention. The affirmative would sit here and play with your emotions by having you believe this is just about combating false information and saving lives. In reality, this is about control. This is about keeping the people pacified and uneducated. And I don't know about you all, but after the history of my people, I will not stand idly by as the affirmative advocates for the silencing of our voices.
It is a myth to believe that information is not already being controlled. The question isn't if control exists, it's who holds it and to what end. Yes, we understand. Right now, social media platforms allow false information to thrive, not out of a commitment to free speech as they will have you believe, but because lies generate profits, engagement, and power. The issue isn't about silencing voices. It's about ensuring the truth isn't the one being silenced. Under the weight of unchecked falsehoods, we have already lost too much. Lives stolen, trust shattered, democracy pushed to the brink, and yet we hesitate. We hesitate to act. We hesitate to regulate. We pretend free speech and accountability cannot coexist, ignoring that our hesitation is actually costing lives. Molly Russell was just one. One life lost to a system, whether in the US, UK, or Russia, a system that failed to protect her. How many more people need to go before we understand that this isn't about the country, but about our lives? Heck, you could be the next Molly Russell. It wasn't a matter of whether she was in the UK or US. It was about her life. During the COVID-19 pandemic, misinformation didn't just mislead, it killed. Conspiracy theories spread faster than medical advice. And the result, or you want to know the result, millions of unnecessary deaths, lives lost not to the virus, but disinformation. Then there was January 6th, a violent attack on our democracy, fueled by months of election lies. Free speech did not cause that riot, unchecked falsehood did. And immigrants, we already face narratives designed to spark fear, violence, and discrimination. You heard it, I heard it, we all heard it. The immigrants, they're eating the pets, the dogs, bizarre. Yet, in Springfield, Ohio, that exact lie spread like wildfire. Immigrants were falsely accused of harming local pets, leading to bomb threats, evacuations, and panic. And we're talking about free speech. Free speech, how about the lives of people? Local authorities debunked the claims, but guess what? The damage already done.
So when we talk about false information, we aren't just talking about words on screen, we're talking about real consequences. Family who will never see their loved ones again. Communities torn apart. A democracy struggling to survive under the weight of relentless lies. Regulation is not about making sure people lack free speech. It's about ensuring that when you search for truth, when the people search for truth, they are met with facts and not fabrications. Regulation is about making sure that when people search for truth, they're met with facts and not fabrication. It's about holding platforms accountable for the harm that they enable, the chaos they create, and the lives they endanger when they refuse to act. Because if they won't take responsibility, then we must. If they won't protect the people using their platforms, then it's up to us to demand a change. Regulation is not about restriction, it's about responsibility. It's about building a digital world where truth stands a chance, where facts aren't buried under an avalanche of falsehoods, where no one else has to suffer the fate of Molly Russell, whether she was in the UK, Nigeria, or the US. Because I refuse to stand here and watch another tragedy unfold while we pretend we didn't see this coming. I refuse to let the next Molly Russell be another avoidable statistic. I refuse to act like misinformation is not taking lives. And while we're at it, let's be real. This isn't about trusting the government. It's about recognizing that someone has to take accountability. If not the government, then who? The very people who stand a lot to profit from these false information. I ask you, if not the governments that we elect, then who? Have you lost faith in the better America? All this chaos that happened during the election, all these black people going out to vote because they believe in a better America, have we lost faith in that? If not the better government that we expect, then who? To the judges, we urge you, please set aside personal bias. Do not decide based on the fear of what could happen if we regulate, but on the undeniable reality of what is already happening without regulation. Some will say regulating social media is too extreme, that it limits speech, but I ask, what about the voices already silenced? What about people who will never speak again because false information stole their future? The United States must regulate social media because the alternative, the path we are already on, only leads to more devastation, more division, more lives lost to lies. And that price is a price that we just cannot afford to pay. Thank you.
America. America values the freedom to be independent. In fact, being independent thinkers is the definition of the land of the free, right? My opponent would have you believe the government censorship of false information is a positive thing, that it would prevent mass riots and anarchy similarly to what we saw happen on the Capitol on January 6th. But may I ask, who determines this misinformation that we see? If we leave it in the hands of the government that we have so gratefully elected, who is determining what will fact check them in the end? What lies were spread by the current administration that rules this country, such as a rigged election, that were later disproved? What government is trying to cover this up? What history of ours, of mine, of yours are they trying to erase under the guise of regulation? A regulation of free speech is a regulation on what we choose to educate ourselves on. Your voice is everything. That much my opponent and I can agree on. Without it, you can't express who you are. Your voice is silenced. Now, I know you've already been asked to do this, but close your eyes yet again. Imagine a world where every move you make, every breath you take, and job you work is dictated by the government. Where your every glance is monitored. Where even your heartbeat, if a beat too fast, could get you arrested and possibly executed. That anyone who disagrees with the government somehow becomes an unsafe criminal. Who you love, what you think, what you do is dictated without your say in the matter. Now, open them. I have just transported you to the world of 1984, a society written by the famous George Orwell, now banned. Though he wrote it fueled after he witnessed the horrors post-World War II that silenced multiple voices due to the corrosive effects of propaganda and the suppression of individual thought across countries. In many ways, American society has become like 1984 already. In the book, the main form of thought suppression is media suppression and the suppression of free speech. Within the book, there is a ministry of truth, but that truth controls the history of that society. The books are rewritten and re-edited to go along with whatever administration that is in power. Now, one could argue that America tried to do this exact same thing with the TikTok ban. Do you not remember how you felt when you were scrolling and suddenly it popped up that you could no longer scroll or post or comment or like anything you thought you should say? The movement to ban TikTok was because TikTok was the only unregulated social media platform in America. America, in order to reinstate TikTok, wanted the Chinese CEOs of it to resell it back so that they could regulate what was on their platform. Now, when we got TikTok back, did anybody notice anything different? Did your For You page seem a little off? Were you now following representatives that you did not agree with? Bethany, a famous influencer according to Forbes magazine, noticed that her For You page was not receiving any news on the recent California wildfires that devastated multiple lives. This level of censorship and distraction from awareness of what is truly going on in our current world proves to be dangerous and could even promote an ignorant society, leaving what we know and what we are educated on in the hands of our government, further closing our eyes to what our reality may be. According to researcher Jeremy Sachs from NPR, since January 2021, 35 states have introduced 137 bills limiting what schools can teach in regards to race, American history, politics, sexual orientation, and gender identity, creating a minefield for educators to try to figure out how to teach topics like slavery, Jim Crow laws, and the Holocaust. Now, those sound a little like the DEI regulations that have been put in place. Who would that affect more, minorities or the great majority? If we allow such restrictions to continue, what will happen when the atrocities of slavery are minimized? Will the sacrifices of those who fought for our freedom be erased? Will their struggles be reduced to mere whispers in history? Our history shapes our identity, and without it, what are we? Censoring knowledge under the guise of protection only weakens our foundation as a society. The First Amendment protects us from government overreach, as previously stated by my wonderful teammate. It exists to ensure free speech, not to grant the government power over truth. If the government regulates misinformation on social media, we risk censorship and manipulation of public discourse. History warns us that nations like Russia and Turkey use fake news laws to silence dissent, and even the US government has pressured platforms to suppress narratives, giving them various incentives like a government promotion or funding for their company. The misinformation about Springfield, Ohio was perpetuated by the very government entities that my opponents advocate for regulating information. This raises the critical question: should the government be the sole authority in controlling false information? While we do agree that accountability is necessary in addressing the spread of false information, placing the power of regulation entirely in the hands of the government could risk further manipulation of the truth. We must explore alternatives that ensure transparency and fairness rather than giving any single entity unchecked control over what is deemed true or false. Much like both teams here have researched both sides in order to present our arguments to you, the audience. The real issue is not whether regulation is needed, but how to achieve it without compromising fundamental freedoms or fostering more misinformation. Let's look at Germany. While Germany has atoned for the sins of the Holocaust, has America truly atoned for its historical injustices? If we let the government decide what is true, we not only silence dissent, but also avoid confronting our past, dooming ourselves to inevitably repeat it. False information is a challenge, but government censorship isn't the answer. Private solutions, like Twitter's community notes, have reduced misinformation by 50% through user-driven fact-checking. Instead of giving the government unchecked power, we must promote media literacy, transparency, and open debate, the true pillars of what makes a great democracy. Now, could you live without your voice? Imagine if all of your social media was regulated to only what the government wanted you to see. You wouldn't be able to speak or think freely. What laws would be put in place? The truth itself is a multifaceted thing, just as we are all multifaceted human beings. A story is never complete with just one side. So I ask you today, please keep that in mind as you make your decisions. George Orwell once stated, "Who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the past controls the present." And just think, if you give up your free speech, your voice, what else could you possibly be giving up in the future? It might even cost you your life.
Let's give both teams a hand. At this time, we are going to dismiss our judges. I want to have Ms. Terry Dukes in the back guide them to a room back here. And they have about 6 minutes to determine a winner. Please take your score sheets and discuss in the back room. In the meantime, what is being passed out to you now is a QR code. At this point, hopefully you all have been listening and consider the arguments, not just the side that you agree with, but which team presented the best argument, and make your choice. We will allow a few minutes to do so while we take this brief break before our closing monologue and the announcement of the winner. The judges do their announcement on the judges winner, and before our President Kathy announces a People's Choice winner, we will be graced with a closing monologue from first-year scholar Chanel White from Raleigh, North Carolina. Give her a hand as she comes. Give her a hand as she comes.
Children, I come back today to tell you the story of the long, dark way that I had to climb, that I had to know in order that the race might live and grow. Look at my face, as dark as the night, yet shining like the sun in love's true light. I am the dark girl who crossed the Red Sea, carrying in my body the seed of the free. I am the woman who worked in the fields, bringing cotton and corn to yield. I am the one who labored as a slave, beaten and mistreated for the work I gave. Children sold away from me, husband sold too. No safety, no love, no respect was I due. 300 years in the deepest South. But God put a prayer in my mouth. God put a dream like steel in my soul. Now, through my children, I'm reaching the goal. Now, through my children, young and free, I've realized the blessing deed to me. I couldn't read then. I couldn't write. I had nothing back there in the night. Sometimes the valley filled with tears, but I had to keep trudging on through the lonely years. Sometimes the road was as hot as the sun, but I had to keep on till the work was done. I had to keep on, no stopping for me. I was the seed of the coming free. I nourished the dream that none could smother deep in my breast, the Negro mother. I had only hope then, but now through you, dark ones of today, my dreams must come true. All you dark children in the world out there, remember my sweat, my pain, my despair. Remember those years filled heavy with sorrow, and make of those years a torch for tomorrow. Make of my past a road to the light, and make of that past, out of the darkness, the ignorance, the night. Lift high my banner out of the dust. Stand like free men supporting my trust. Believe in the right. Let none hold you back. Remember the whip and the slaver's track. But march ever forward, breaking down bars, and look ever upward to the sun and the stars. Oh, my sweet children, may my dreams and my prayers impel you forever up the great stairs. For I will be with you till no white brother dares keep down the children of the Negro mother.
Thank you, Chanel. So as Mr. Dixon comes to speak on behalf of the judges panel, that was a piece by Langston Hughes called The Negro Mother. So she did a great job. All righty, Mr. Dixon is going to provide some comments and announce the judges winner.
All right, good evening, everyone. All right, so this was extremely hard, and that's great because debates are supposed to be hard for judges to determine a winner. But before we announce the winner, I want everybody to give our teams a round of applause. It's one that takes a lot of work to prepare for 30, 40 minutes of debate, but then it also takes a lot of guts to get up and to debate in front of a group of people. And so we felt that both teams understood their topics. We felt that both teams had good rebuttals, with the affirmative team really rebuting accountability, and then your negative team rebuting the failure to address the main issue of misinformation. The category of use of facts set our winner aside. And so the committee voted on the negative team as the winner.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. And based on the survey results, the People's Choice winner is also the negative team. Yes. So we're gonna allow our students to take a picture and photos with the judges. As we close this evening, I wanna thank you for your presence here. Thank you for your input. I'm the People's Choice winner. Debate is challenging, debate is tough. And usually with any debate resolution, there is usually a more challenging stance and an easier stance. So although the negative did have the easier stance, because it's hard to argue against free speech, they did a great job, as did our affirmative team. Give it up for them. Did a great job and making great points. So we hope to, with some funding, take this show on the road and debate at other universities and other competitions, and to continue to perfect the art of debate. I'm a proud coach tonight. I'm very, very proud of each team. So this ends our event. We want to thank our judges. Dr. Blackman, give it up for him. Mr. Dixon, Dr. Teague, and Ms. Nelson. I want to thank each of my teams, especially my captain, Miracle, who worked so hard. She worked so hard to make sure that that the team is prepared, and leading some of the practices and doing the research on the art of debate, and making sure that we are all prepared for when we have to stand up and perform. So there are other events to come this semester. We hope to see you at those events as well. Again, in closing, thank you so much. Have a good night.